Kenya is burning not metaphorically, but in the most literal sense. Flames consume its forests, blood stains its streets, and silence echoes from the very top of power. Bodies lie on tarmac roads. Ash falls like rain over once vibrant neighborhoods. The youth are no longer just protesting, they are rising. And the president, whose voice once carried promises, now offers only silence. What happened to this nation that once stood as a beacon of stability in East Africa? Why does it feel like everything is collapsing at once? It all began with a scream and then a gunshot, then another. June 25, 2024, marked a turning point in Kenya's modern history. That day, police opened fire on unarmed demonstrators in Nairobi. These weren't rioters. They were citizens speaking out against the controversial finance bill. But the response was brutal and immediate. Blood pooled on the pavement. A country that once celebrated its democratic journey cracked in full view of the world, fractured by rage, betrayal, and bullets. This was not a random event. It was a wound ripped open after years of pressure, frustration, and state violence. What followed was not chaos, but a coordinated uprising. From Nairobi to Mombasa, Eldoret to Kisumu, Kenya's youth chanted with a new fire in their lungs. We are tired. Ruto must go. Justice or nothing. These were no longer pleas, they were demands. And by July 2025, over 126 people had been killed. The government denies the numbers, but footage, eyewitnesses, and live streams paint a horrific truth, one where protesters vanish into unmarked vans, where morgues overflow, and where families are left begging for information that never comes. Then came the death of Albert Ojwang, a young activist and blogger whose words dared to challenge the economic policies of President Ruto. Detained under suspicious circumstances in June 2025, his body returned days later bruised, battered, and silenced. His death ignited a wildfire across the nation. It wasn't just about him. It was about every young person who had ever dared to speak up. Within hours, hashtags demanding justice trended across Africa. Vigils turned into clashes, candles became shields, and the people no longer begged, they resisted. The state's answer: more bullets, more curfews, more fear. Nairobi's bustling center, once alive with trade and chatter, now echoes with chants, sirens, and screams. Makeshift barricades made of burnt-out cars block entire streets. Drones hover above the crowds, and undercover agents snatch suspected leaders in broad daylight. Some are released after beatings, others are never seen again, but none of it has stopped the movement, because this isn't about a single bill. It's about a broken promise between a people and their government. And while the cities burn with unrest, another kind of fire scorches the countryside, one far older, far quieter, and just as deadly. Kenya's forests are on fire. Mount Kenya, the Aberdare Range, the Mau Forest, these ecological jewels are disappearing in flames. Since early 2025, over 1,350 hectares of forest have been lost to what is being called the worst wildfire season in the country's history. But with all eyes on political turmoil, few have noticed, fewer still seem to care. Yet these two disasters, one of rage, the other of neglect, are connected. One shows a nation abandoned by its leaders, the other shows a land being consumed by the cost of that abandonment. In 2024, Kenya saw one of its wettest seasons in years. Thanks to a strong El Niño, vegetation bloomed, the land flourished. But when 2025's dry season arrived, hotter, windier, and drier than anything in recent memory, all that lush growth became fuel. It took only a spark. But not all fires are natural. Human actions played a dangerous role. Farmers still use fire to clear land. Charcoal production remains rampant. Poachers light forests to drive animals into traps. And sometimes, desperate villagers light fires to draw attention, an infernal cry for help in a country that seems to have forgotten them. Corrupt officials turn a blind eye or even benefit from the destruction. And when the flames roar, the state's response is as fractured as ever. The Kenya Forest Service has been begging for resources for years. Their staff are underfunded, their tools outdated, and their warnings ignored. Volunteers fight infernos with jerrycans and branches, while government helicopters sit idle. And in places like Mount Kenya, once a symbol of Kenya's natural beauty, the losses are immeasurable. Rivers fed by glacial runoff are drying. Wildlife is fleeing. What was once paradise now resembles a graveyard of ash. And while experts warn that climate change will only make things worse, the government acts as if these disasters are background noise. They aren't. When forests burn, futures burn. These aren't just trees. They are water towers, air filters, and climate regulators. Their destruction means economic collapse, food shortages, and a permanent ecological scar. Yet despite all this, Kenya's leadership continues to delay, deflect, and deny. Year after year, the same pattern repeats. Officials promise reforms only when the damage is too visible to ignore. Environmental agencies are ignored. Climate task forces don't coordinate. Ministries work in silos, and no one seems willing to take full responsibility. It's not just incompetence, it's a system built to avoid accountability at all costs. Corruption acts like a slow-burning fuel. Funds meant for emergency response vanish. Forest conservation budgets are slashed. Contracts go to unqualified insiders. Even firefighting gear is left to rot while forests disappear. And when journalists ask questions, they are threatened. When citizens protest, they are met with force. In a system this broken, destruction becomes the only language the powerful understand. What makes this crisis especially heartbreaking is that Kenya doesn't lack talent or solutions. It has brave scientists, activists, and youth ready to rebuild. What it lacks is political courage. The courage to act before the sky turns black. The courage to treat governance not as a reaction, but as a responsibility. So now, we face a deeper question. What does it mean when a country's cities burn with rebellion and its forests burn with fire? It means that Kenya is not just in crisis. It is at a crossroads, and the time to listen, act, and change is running out. Who actually benefits when a nation descends into chaos? If a system consistently fails its citizens, then perhaps it was never designed for them in the first place. That's the question echoing across Kenya today. Because while ordinary people face bullets, smoke, and silence, someone somewhere is gaining from the destruction. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos exploring African history, culture, and identity. Now, let's return to the heart of the matter. If people are dying, if forests are burning, if justice is denied, why does nothing fundamentally change? Why does the state respond with force instead of reform, and with denials rather than solutions? The uncomfortable truth is that for some, this breakdown is profitable. Kenya's current turmoil, both political and ecological, is not just a failure. For a select few, it's a carefully exploited opportunity. Take the protests, for example. The finance bill that first sparked national outrage wasn't a random misstep. It was a calculated move. At a time when inflation was crushing working families, the government introduced new taxes that disproportionately impacted the poor, while protecting the wealthy. This wasn't mismanagement. It was the preservation of privilege. As protests erupted and chaos spread, powerful individuals moved quietly behind the scenes, securing lucrative contracts, supplying police equipment, and brokering deals under the guise of national emergency. In the shadows, land changed hands, properties were cleared through force, and state-aligned actors reaped the rewards. Meanwhile, in the forests, another disaster was unfolding. Kenya's wildfires weren't just ignored, they were allowed to persist. Why? Because when trees are gone, restrictions disappear. Land that once belonged to the public is suddenly up for grabs. Protected zones lose their status in crisis, and timber cartels, developers, and land speculators swoop in. There's mounting suspicion that some of these fires aren't natural. Some begin in known illegal logging areas and spread in unnaturally controlled directions. Once the damage is done, that land is turned into farms, hotels, private estates, whatever. Sells, and nobody is held accountable. Corruption fuels the flames. Environmental officials are bribed to stay quiet. Local administrators receive incentives to mishandle disaster responses. Political allies use the crisis to justify massive loans that later vanish into private pockets. Disinformation spreads rapidly. Government-linked influencers downplay the fires, mock environmental warnings, and label activists as troublemakers or foreign agents. Protesters are demonized. The real beneficiaries, contractors, officials, cronies hide behind the noise, extracting wealth from the ashes. But perhaps the most dangerous outcome is how quickly the public becomes numb. When tragedy repeats often enough, it starts to feel ordinary. That's what the profiteers are counting on. They don't need support, they just need people to grow tired. Tired of outrage, tired of resistance, tired of hope. And yet, something powerful is stirring beneath the surface. Across Kenya, grassroots movements are refusing to let the truth die in silence. Young people, activists, journalists, and whistleblowers are working to expose what's really happening. They're mapping out land deals, releasing investigative reports, naming names. They're connecting the dots the government hoped would remain scattered. What was once seen as survival is now turning into a mission, one of exposure, accountability, and change. But exposure alone won't be enough. The real test lies in what comes after. Every fire leads to choices: rebuild or decay. And Kenya, standing in the soot of its political and ecological collapse, must now decide what future it wants. The flames and the fury were not meaningless. They were warnings, signals that the social contract is broken. The government no longer represents the governed. Institutions that once protected now punish. And nature, long neglected, has become a victim too. Still, amid the darkness, a different kind of fire is spreading, one not of destruction, but of awakening. Kenya's youth, once underestimated, are leading the way. They've built their own platforms, organized protests with digital precision, and documented abuses with more credibility than traditional media. Telegram chats now act as newsrooms. TikTok clips reach more eyes than official broadcasts. These young citizens aren't waiting for change, they're creating it. And they're not alone. Rural communities devastated by wildfire are coming together, forming cooperatives to protect land and demand climate justice. Displaced families are organizing for compensation. Middle-class Kenyans, once detached, now realize that no gated estate can shield them from state failure. Civil society groups are growing bolder. They're filing lawsuits, invoking constitutional rights, and working with global partners to bypass corrupt ministries and directly support grassroots solutions. But rebuilding isn't just about pushing back, it's about reimagining what Kenya could be. True transformation demands more than speeches or symbolic gestures. It means redefining leadership, ending the culture of impunity in the police, prosecuting those behind protester deaths, and declaring climate change a national security emergency with real funding and enforceable laws. It means reversing illegal land grabs, tearing up shady permits, and involving those long-ignored youth, scientists, indigenous communities in writing the next chapter. Of course, power doesn't give itself up quietly. Already, there are signs of co-optation, distraction campaigns, and attempts to divide the movement. But this generation is different. They're not just angry, they're prepared. They're not shouting into the void. They're designing a future. And while there's no guarantee of victory, the system that ignored them before is finally taking. Notice the old guard is watching the clock, hoping this momentum will fade. But that may be a miscalculation, because what's happening in Kenya now isn't just an uprising. It's a redefinition of power. It's a population that refuses to be pacified, that refuses to be erased. So the question is no longer if Kenya will survive. The real question is, whose Kenya will rise from the rubble? Will it still belong to the political dynasties who watched the nation burn and called it reform? Or will it belong to the children of resistance, the generation raised in smoke and sacrifice? Who dared to dream of something better? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you'd like to see more content like this, deep dives into African culture, lost history, suppressed truths, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because the story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning.